Escaping the Fold by Vincent Merkel. The Lie. I set down my burden of silver and aluminum and began fixing the damaged shield. I felt it was wisest to build our kites as I solved the problems posed by the intricate mechanisms that made the shield operate. I made some temporary fixes upon Alexandra's insistence, but they did not work. I explained the nature of the malfunctioning device. The brilliance of the reflected light would not be enough for the colons to get a message if the louvers, cams, and gears were not right. In many cases, to the width of the finest camel hair, the device would fail. I drew plans for the first kite. I could use the measurements from the prototype after being tested to improve upon the second set of wings. My method was simple. The span of the wing depended on the ratio of the surface area compared to the weight the wings would need to lift. Gravity, wind, velocity, and a myriad of other calculations were required to construct the gliders, but I recalled the teachings of my beloved uncle. That enabled me to fashion a serviceable, controllable airfoil. To my dismay, after I finished the first kite, it proved too light and small to generate the lift and momentum needed for a successful flight to Deuteronomy, so I salvaged the parts to build another one. The shape and structure of the second kite was akin to modern hang gliders. It was a well-balanced flying contraption that could carry Alexandra's weight. I again turned my attention to repairing the silver communication device. Drawings of the shield components etched into the underdome walls gave me a good guide of how to complete the challenging project. For several weeks I studied the walls and the bas-relief drawings and plans for the complex mirror that were carved into the tomb panels. Without that road map, I could not have successfully repaired the shield, as it required exacting precision for it to function correctly. As I learned how to fix the communication device, I also learned something about chemistry and the trap I could set to capture Linnea and escape the island. To build the trap, I had to return to my first home in the little cove below the stalwart granite wall that separated the north beach from the rest of the island. I needed to gather some of the plentiful amber crystals that grew on the rocks in and around my little home, far below the mountain ridge. The elements required to build the trap finally began to make sense to me, but I didn't share my findings with Alexandra because I knew that I would soon have to tell her a lie. Alexandra would have never left me on the island alone, but as I worked on my plans for our salvation, she would disappear for days at a time to spy on the Malaks and their progress up the mountain. On the days that she was not in the field and jungle, she told me what she had observed, and I trained her to fly. I rigged a rope to Alexandra's glider. 100 yards of the strong nylon fibers were spliced together and anchored to the ridge with a python, cam, and pulley to keep her from losing control. The system allowed me to watch her in flight and design a harness that would be comfortable and responsive to shifts in her body weight. Alexandra had taken a few tumbles with the awkward and cumbersome wings over her head as practice ensued. The glider was not damaged, and she was an able and determined student. She took my instructions to heart, even though I was sometimes imprecise in my directions, and she had sustained numerous scrapes and bruises by following my explicit directions. I tried to reason with her. Alexandra, sometimes you take things too literally. Now the glider is yours. You have to tell me what you think I need to do to make it fly better for you.
What did you say?
Alexandra called down to me from 40 feet above my head. During her flight, she had been stressing the system of ropes and pulleys that kept her earthbound. I reached my right hand over my left and heaved the rope to me. You have to help me bring you in a little, I shouted up at her after bringing her 10 feet closer to the landing. It's the hardest part. Drop the nose a little. Very good. Now lean the nose back and flare the wings like a bird. Get ready to run off the energy so you can stop smoothly and not crash. She landed as if it was no big feat. I wiped the sweat from my brow and met her on the ridge. Alexandra, I will not be there to tow you in when we land. It was my first lie to her, as I fully well knew that I could not build another aircraft like the one she flew and join her in flight. Half of the ship's sails were torn and weathered. I picked the best materials for her wings, and there was none to spare for me, but I had unlocked the mysteries of the hieroglyphs on her walls. I wasn't afraid, even as Alexandra told me about what she had witnessed from her earlier trek inland. From her scouting missions on the ground, my enchanting warrior friend told me about the advancing Malaks. They had found the granite face that kept the Theodoro obscured from view. Her observation was that by the time she stopped spying on the search party, they had exhibited signs of boredom and were too lazy to climb the stone face and find the ship. It was just a matter of time. They had set up a camp and had already infiltrated her father's cabin. Further up the mountains, she recounted how our carefully laid traps had stopped some advancing scouts, both frightening and slowing the progress of the Malaks and their new compatriots pressed into service from neighboring islands by Linnea. Alexandra told me that she saw a strange white-haired man that was accompanied by the Malak soldier that she had witnessed so many years ago. I surmised the strange man was Christos, as her descriptions fit him. The other man was definitely Omuela. She could never forget his face and the determined smile that had taken over his expression. Perhaps it was his ability to smile through the harshest of circumstances that brought Omuela to the foreground in Alexandra's mind. She was right to fear him. As Omuela's confidence grew while standing next to the captain, his strength and brutality was clear to any around him. He was the ultimate enforcer to his emperor Christos. The Malak renegade had learned more from Christos than he could attribute to any other in his shallow existence. He learned about the big picture from the weathered Greek captain turned criminal. Omuela began to dream on a grand scale and longed to live on polished floors and be fed grapes by his harem of concubines to be taken at his whim. He wouldn't even be compelled to share his booty because of Chief Malak's laws and Kaukaka's incantations. From watching the two in the jungle, Alexandra deduced that it was a good probability that Omuela was more dedicated to Christos than to the beast that they served. I had just polished the last bearing in the louvered actuator and finished the repairs on the shield. I held a notebook of Alexandra's that had 2 pages of code to be relayed to authorities on the other island. We stood at the pinnacle of Teleonisi. Let us do one more test flight before we send a message to the Kalans, and then I will start building the next glider. It was the second time I lied to the trusting Alexandra. I stood on the ridge with the beautiful and wondrous woman that had captured my heart. It was before midday, and the morning light was warming us with the last of its appeasing charms, while a large bank of cumulus clouds churned 40 miles to the northwest. They were headed our way, and the air current at Teleonisi's peak was steadily blowing, and I knew that the approaching cloud bank would be brought by increasing winds. On days like that one, it was a 4 or 5 hour journey for the encroaching storm to reach our haven. Alexandra, I cautioned as I tightened her harness and adjusted the sling that hung from the frame of her kite. Today, you will fly higher than before. You will fly over the edge of the cliff and test your skill and land without my assistance on the rope. She looked at me with some dismay.
I do not think that I am ready for that, Thomas.
I reassured her. You will do great. Just remember everything I have taught you when you're in the air and ready to land. The girl was eager to run and take off. Wait a moment, I said. This time you must take your pack and weapons, so we know the glider can handle the extra weight. I smiled as I handed her the survival equipment.
Okay.
She said,
We will send a message with the shield when I land. Then we fix your airplane.
I lied to her a 3rd time. Yes, Alexandra, then we fix my airplane. Alexandra ran with the weight of my contraption on her shoulders from the highest point of the island down the ledge and across a small field. When she tilted the frontmost point of the wing upwards, the breeze caught it and easily lifted her from the ground. She was airborne. I let the rope out, and soon she was sailing 100 feet above my head. She scanned the beach and inched the craft forward over the canopy of trees far below the summit. She yelled out to me,
I see more canoes on the horizon. They will be here soon.
I jerked the tether that held her bound to the cliff, an indication I had devised to let her know that I wanted to communicate with her. Alexia, I shouted, tell my friends Vagelis and George that I will see them soon. You are flying to Deuteronomy today. It was hard to hear a voice over the winds that day, but I heard her, so I assumed she had heard me.
What are you talking about?
She yelled, looking down on me from under her harness. I unsheathed my machete and waved it for her to see so she would have no doubt about my forthcoming actions. She began to scream.
No, Thomas, please. I am not ready. I cannot do it without you. I must say goodbye to my animals.
She made many excuses not to fly that day as she begged me not to cut the cord. I calmed her when my voice boomed out, Alexia! She answered,
Yes, Tommy?
My last words to the hovering Alexandra that morning were, Alexia, from here on, I will never lie to you again. I love you. I swung my machete and cut the safety line. Her kite lifted 300 feet in altitude before I could blink my eyes. I listened to her voice as she yelled down at me and sailed up into the lower reaches of heaven and started flying towards Deuteronomy. The last thing I heard her say was,
You flagging snamo, my glitching blaster.
Her words appeared to carry on that way as she flew out of sight, but it was purely speculation on my part at that point. My mind played a trick on me as I watched Alexandra maneuver the light aircraft further to the northwest. I imagined that I heard her voice trailing on the winds that would carry her home to her parents. In that soft sound lost in the hard breeze, she told me that she loved me. I was alone again. Now the island was my sandbox, and I would play a trick on the grandest schemer and trickster and free the waterway between the two islands, if only for a brief time, from the dark and scheming troublemaker Linnea and his advancing minions. Before I could start implementing the ancient instructions written on the Underdome walls, I had to send a message to the Kalan sentries on the far-away ridge on Deuteronomy. Mickey, Zeus, and Odysseus pressed their weight against my legs as they looked up at the speck in the air that was Alexandra. All three of the thylacines turned their heads as their kind master flew out of sight. They rose from their haunches and took to the wilderness with their heads down. I had never seen the predatory creatures distraught before that moment. They continued to hunt the trails, and Zeus called to me from the cover of the jungle. I called his name in the language of the Tasmanian tigers. Each one of the loyal creatures sounded their positions to me with a yip. They were always close to me, but chose to remain out of sight. As I approached the place on the ridge that the message to the Kalans was to be sent from, the chirp of a tree frog from Mickey's throat cleared my path, and I felt safe as I knew that Alexandra's striped beasts would continue their mission with me. I located 3 nooks carved into the face of the granite plateau. The feet of the tripod fit precisely into the notches. I added the weight of the polished silver shield to the tripod base and slowly turned it on the vertical axis. I counted the clicks that the machine made and stopped at the appropriate number. I then turned the instrument on the horizontal axis and sighted the sun through a peephole on the top edge of the silver shield. I worked a slide on the side that positioned the louvers for maximum reflections of the burning sun to be bounced to the complex and faceted interior of the device. Alexandra had warned me not to look into the front of the shield at that stage, as one could easily be blinded, but I didn't fully believe her. I carefully peeked into the shining surface and decided that she was right. It was extremely bright. I pulled a trigger that actuated the louvers and shut the sun out of the reflective surfaces. I squeezed the lever 3 times. A triangular marking on the top edge of the apparatus pointed to where I should focus when the louvers were closed. The silver illuminated. A beam of light directed by a similar shield on Deuteronomy shimmered on the triangular symbol in 3 bursts. It was my turn to send a security code established by Alexandra. I worked the variable control and initiated communications. The timing was crucial. Princess Anasta stood on Deuteronomy, eagerly awaiting a message with her guests and best friends, John and Antigone Sotakis. The last message Alexandra had sent before the Morlocks had destroyed her shield was, "Watch every 3rd night until the beacon lights and flashes 3 times." The watchman called out in a matter-of-fact tone, "A signal from the southern ridge addressed to Princess Anasta and her guests. Alexandra's sequence was received, but I ask permission to advise you." The princess answered the watchman,
"I am ready, Druag. Proceed."
The middle-aged king's guard turned to his beloved princess Anasta. I don't think it's Alexandra's hand operating the communicator, but it is no Malak that signals. The trigger control of the messaging system was very smooth in its actuation. It was so sensitive that a pulse detected in the hand that actuated it could be seen from a schooled watchman on a distant shore. It was a difficult tool to use, but over the month since Christos's arrival to Teleonisi, Alexandra had taught me a good deal of the code that she used. If light could measure the way that Alexandra spoke, in her hand the shield had reflected her knowledge. A previous night, as she had returned from her watch over the island, Alexandra told me the secret to her signals. It was about adding an active pulse contrasted to the intensity of light that made her communications successful. It had to be done in accordance with the rules of the Kalan language mixed with the Minoan alphabet. Because of those facts, it was a very confusing and counterintuitive code, but I had learned a good share of Alexandra's method from my studies over the preceding months. I knew enough to be able to communicate simple concepts, but needed to convey exactitudes. I wrote with the power of the sun. Alexandra will be arriving at Deuteronomy in 2 to 4 hours. She is in flight. Look for her from coast and ridge. John will recognize the sail from the Theodoro. I waited and watched the triangular light receptacle on my shield. As it lit, I drew a graph of the message and deciphered it. The sender asked, "Who are you?" I signaled my name and message. Thomas, no time. Find my friends Vangelis and George. Tell Vangelis amber crystals are the key to free travel. George must talk stars with Alexandra to find way out. I waited a moment and watched the rim of the silver dish. A weakening light flashed from the faraway peak. Please repeat your message. Just then, Mickey had called out to me with the voice of an owl. It was a sound that warned of intruders. I quickly worked the trigger one more time. I sent the simplest of messages. Malak's up to no good. Before I gathered the shield and my gear and turned to the jungle to investigate Mickey's warning, I sent one final message. Alexandra comes from the air. Be ready to receive her. Upon leaving the site, I dispatched a Soul Malak warrior, threw him over the cliff, and retreated to the western trail that led to the lower door to my safe haven, the Underdome. Anasta and the Sirtakis couple were emotionally moved to finally get a signal after months of looking for a hint of Alexandra's well-being. The princess was very intelligent and thoughtful. She moved and spoke with quickness.
Get message to the king. Post extra sentries and warriors along our coast. Prepare our defensive positions and have every canoe and kayak ready to embark the blue waters.
The princess sealed a note to her father and passed it to her most trusted watchman.
Druag, see that the king gets this. It seems that we are to watch the sky, but it could be a ploy. For every set of eyes that watches the heavens, let there be a pair to monitor the seas.
Druag took the note and turned to the trail that led to the City of Lights. Yes, Princess Anasta. The princess held the note tightly before releasing it into her guard's hand.
It is a matter of Kalan security,
she urged.
Any person that might try to slow you down or intercept this message shall be immediately jailed or killed. Let wisdom be your guide. Also send for the newcomers, Vangelis and George. Make sure that they have a trusted guard detail.
Druag nodded in agreement. "Princess, the cult of the Dark Swimmer is no threat to us. After King James receives your words, I will then send for the newcomers. Any who stand against us will fall." Anasta released the note. Druag jogged up the path and shouted orders to the king's most trusted men as he passed them along the well-polished stone path that led to the citadel on the island's acropolis.